Good afternoon now. As I started the last session, it was good morning, and now it's good afternoon. I want to thank everyone who's in attendance today for joining us for a moderated dialogue with members of the Legacy Alumni of Color group, and the dialogue is entitled Moving the Needle. My name is Ian Delahanty. I'm an assistant professor of history here at Springfield. I apologize for those of you who've heard that twice today now, but more importantly, I am really delighted to be joined by three members of the Legacy Alumni of Color group: Dr. Donald Brown, Ms. Terry Burr, and Mr. Richard Griffin. So let me just introduce each of the panelists, and then I'll kind of quickly describe our format before we get into the Q&A with them. So first, Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown graduated from Springfield College in 1969 and later earned a master's in rehabilitation counseling from Springfield before he went on to take his doctoral degree in education from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. He brings us nearly 50 years of experience with the leadership of and experience with academic support programs aimed at student retention, both in his long tenure at Boston College's Office of AHANA Student Programming, and in his current work, Dr. Brown has developed mentoring opportunities to increase student and staff satisfaction. He is the founder and CEO of Brown and Associates Education and Diversity Consulting, and that firm focuses on assisting middle schools, high schools, 2- and 4-year colleges and universities in their efforts to create welcoming environments aimed at ensuring the enrollment, retention, and graduation of first-generation low-income students of color. Miss Terry Burr came to Springfield College, I should say, from Bloomfield, Connecticut, and graduated in 1970 with a degree in teacher education before she also returned to complete a master's of education in guidance and psychological services. She spent most of her career in higher education, and she served as the director of continuing education at the Evening College at Springfield College for 4 years. From there, she went on to serve 300 students to 3,000 students at Springfield Technical Community College, our neighbors up the road at Stick, where her jobs over 36 years included academic dean in the School of Liberal Arts Transfer and General Studies until her retirement in 2012. And her responsibility at Stick allowed her to work directly with the urban community and to assist greater Springfield residents reach their educational goals. And finally, Mr. Richard Griffin graduated from Springfield College with a major in sociology and has more than 45 years of experience in the human relations field, including in program development, community relations, leadership development, family resources programming, higher educational programming, higher educational preparation, I should say, and employment skills training. Mr. Griffin's career has included serving as a program director and recreation coordinator with after-school college access programs, and working as a parent coordinator for Gramercy Arts High School in New York City. All three of our panelists are members of the Legacy Alumni of Color group, and our format will be a moderated discussion with them. I'll ask some questions. They'll each have a chance to respond, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for Q&A with the audience. And our panel wraps up, as we mentioned earlier, I think at 1:05. So let me start with the first question for the three of you, and the question is, who are the Legacy Alumni of Color at Springfield College, and can you tell us how and why your group has come into existence?
Allow me to begin. We are the alumni of color of Springfield College. And we decided that we would come together perhaps 6 months ago. And it started with a conversation with one of the panelists. Well, with both of the panelists, had a feeling that it was time to connect, to find out how we who participated in the common experience in 1969 were doing, whether we were married, what our careers were, whether higher education or whatever. We wanted to find out how we were doing. Because we shared that common experience and had not seen, in many cases, or heard from each other in 50 years, thought it important that we come together. In the process, we found out that some of the things that we were concerned about as legacy alumni of color, more specifically, those of us who participated in the building takeover, the administration building takeover in 1969 and 70. I'm sorry, in 70, it was Massasoit Hall, the dormitory. Okay, wanted to find out how we were doing and to reflect a bit on that experience. In the process, we learned that some of the things that we were concerned about back during our day were still issues of concern for students who are currently attending Springfield College, specifically Black students. There were feelings of alienation and isolation, marginalization during our time at Springfield. Well, we learned about 6 months ago that some of those same experiences persist. And so we're concerned, we were concerned, still concerned about that experience and what it is we can do to ensure that the experience is a better one for current students and that it'll be an even better experience for future generations of BIPOC students at Springfield College. Okay, so that's kind of the backdrop. Let me also mention that we were influenced as the legacy alumni of color by the tenor of the times that we lived in. Okay, you may remember that in 1967, Muhammad Ali refused to enlist in the military, and he suffered grave consequences as a result of doing that. In 1968, Dr. King, you remember, was assassinated. During that time, student organizations came together on predominantly white campuses throughout the country. Locally, the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where I was working, I had served as a resident assistant in an Upward Bound program. On leaving Springfield, I would eventually become the assistant director of that Upward Bound program. So I got to know folk at UMass Amherst and found out what they were concerned about and came to see very early on that their experiences, their concerns were the same as ours at Springfield College. And so with Dr. King's assassination, with students organizing at UMass, at Columbia University, and Cornell University, South Carolina State, we thought it important to organize at Springfield and to share those things with the administration that we were concerned about at that time. So that kind of gives you a backdrop. That's why the legacy alumni of color came to be. And again, that was about 6 months ago.
Harry or Richard, did you want to add anything into Don's explanation, or?
The legacy alumni are an endearing group who really care for one another. It's a friendship group, and although a number of the members of the group, some who are no longer with us, had experiences at Springfield College, but which they, the experiences were not good. It's meeting one another, and it happened to be at Springfield that it took place. So we actually, too, in response of what's been going on, are showing our love for Springfield as well.
I want to say that it was 9 months ago that I got the call from Don Brown about this meeting up with the students that I had not seen or heard from in 50 years. And I was thrilled to join in, to catch up, to learn that everybody was doing very well. And I was pleased about that. And also very concerned that the Black students who are on campus now had the same issues we had back in the 50s. So I wanted to share with them, show our leadership, guidance, and support so they could keep pushing just as we did back in the 60s.
in connection with that point, Ian, leadership, showing leadership. In our coming together, it's important to state that rather than just talking about the problems being experienced by BIPOC students at Springfield College and other colleges and universities across the country, we decided that we needed to do something, to be very specific in sharing with the administration what we'd like to see done to enhance the quality of life for not only BIPOC students, but folk who also work at Springfield College, faculty, staff, administrators. We thought we would take some actions. And what we immediately resolved to do was to put together a number of committees. And we asked members of the committees if they would, of the overall committee, if they would share, whether they would chair these various subcommittees that we were thinking about, included among them mentoring. And you're looking at, or you're sitting next to the person who has done a masterful job in providing leadership and getting a mentoring program off the launching pad at Springfield College. On the other side of you, Richard Griffin, who is the chair of the subcommittee on distinguished alumni. And we'll say more about that a little bit later on. Then the other committee, a day of diversity, which has now since been changed to a day to confront racism, white privilege, and prejudice at Springfield College. We owe a debt of gratitude to a couple of members of our committee who were initially involved in setting up this day. They may or may not be with us today, but it's important to acknowledge John Woodruff and Raymond Cromer, neither of whom got their degrees at Springfield College. They went to other institutions, but they cared enough to agree to serve as the co-chairs of this day to confront racism at Springfield College. The other committee, Committee on Police and Student Relations, overseen by two alum, John Dover and Janet Houston. At that time, she was Janet Turner. We owe those alum a profound debt of gratitude. The other committee, and perhaps the most important, if you will, of all of the committees, is the Committee on Coaching and Faculty. It boggles our imagination that in the history of Springfield College, going back to 1885, there's never been a Black head coach of a major sport at Springfield College. We've been given to understand that there is a head coach of golfing, not a sport that a whole bunch of Black folk are involved in. There are some, but very few. We're happy for the gentleman, but Springfield needs to do better, and that's a major focus of the entire legacy alumni of color family at Springfield College. So I just wanted to share those committees. More action than rhetoric is what we believe in.
So, and you had mentioned, Don, that one of the committees was indeed one that had helped to plan this day, that the day we're having right now is sort of its brainchild. And so I wonder if you could expand a bit, the three of you, on why the day to confront racism is so important to the group, to the Legacy Alumni of Color group.
It's important because it's a continuance, but also a marker on what we're looking to have, and that is honest and open discussion, and to bring a recognition to history so far as Springfield College and race relationships go. And including in that is the community as well, the community of Springfield. So this recognition, this move from a day of concern, as it may have been titled some years back, to a day to confront racism, relevancy to what's going on both on the campus, in this country, and around the world.
I want to say too that this day is important because we no longer can stand by and say nothing with what's going on. And as you can see what's going on in our country, we have a lot of allies. Back in the day, it was civil rights and Black students taking over buildings. That was kind of driving us. Now it's certainly the Black Lives Matter movement, and with the help of social media, we're now seeing every day what's happening to BIPOC individuals. Something that all of us have seen all of our lives. Our parents told us about the discrimination and difficulties. And now it's important that you see what's going on, that you just can't keep your mouth shut. When your friends, when your parents are saying something that you know impacts the truth, then it's time to stand up and say something. And as importantly is to educate yourselves, get to know people who are different from you and their culture. And it takes bravery and it takes time and effort.
As I mentioned earlier, Ian, one of the demands had to do with a day of diversity. If one goes to the Springfield College archives and looks over the conversations that the then president Wilbur Laughlin had with some members of the faculty, and they did that in short order. They did it right after the building takeover in May of 1969. I think they met the next day. And two of the demands that were submitted, 2 out of the 9, were ones that President Laughlin said that he could support. One of them was the Day of Diversity. The other was for a cultural center that became the House of Montu at Springfield College. The Day of Diversity that was proposed was intended to involve the campus community in discussions about racism, cross burnings and the like on the Springfield College campus. It was about the absence of any kind of appreciation for the cultures that we brought as people of color, specifically Black students, to Springfield College. So we wanted a day to be set aside. Thanks be to God, 50 years later, this day has now come to fruition, okay? So we're excited about that. In the Black church experience, one of the things that has always resonated with me is a song sung by choirs across America. And that is, God may not always come when you want him to, but guess what? He's always on time. Our God is awesome and an on-time God. And you know why? As I think about the anti-racist sentiment in this country directed today at our Asian brothers and sisters, we have been called for such a time as this, to talk about confronting racism, to talk about confronting anti-Semitism, to talk about confronting well, let me move beyond that, to confront xenophobia, to confront the other forms of oppression, including sexism, including misogyny, including just a whole range of things that need to be talked about now in 2021. we call for such a time as this. So this day is extremely important.
Also, when I look back to when I was a student here, when the Black students were putting together demands and initially submitting them to the president, the word was getting out on campus that the Black students weren't happy and they were looking for change. At the same time, students were being influenced by what some of the larger universities were going through with buildings being taken over. But back then on our campus, what I found as students, white students started asking questions. When I'd go to class, many times the white students wanted to stop the lesson and discuss the Black problem. So I patiently listened to them. I let them ask questions, and I was the only one in the classes. So I would answer them. But time after time, they wanted to stop class and ask the same questions. What's the Black problem? And I spoke for as long as I could, but there came a point where it seemed as if I was doing all the talking and nobody was really doing any more than listening to what I had to say, but they weren't practicing anything. So there came a point after a few weeks when the students wanted to stop class to discuss the problem. I just said, I'm done talking. It's time, I need to learn so I can get my degree and get out of here and influence the people I care to influence, who I think I might change. So this is a much better setting than what we went through as students. I can only speak for myself, and I'm sure others had their classes stopped as well to discuss the problem.
Yeah, just wanted to, lest I not have an opportunity to thank Calvin, Dr. Hill, and Lisa Holmes, you, Ian, Felicia, Stephanie, Logan, all of y'all who have participated in organizing this day. I don't want to be remiss without acknowledging your huge contribution. So again, I want to say thank you on behalf of the Legacy Alumni Group. But not only that, I want to mention that this day, again, is more important than anything that I can think that Springfield College can do at this point. We're hoping that this will become an annual event. And lest this nation, beginning at places like Springfield College, other predominantly white institutions, and other institutions in our society, begin confronting racism, then I fear that the problem is going to become profoundly worse. I was looking at something over the last couple of days. I was looking at the Southern Poverty Law Center, who monitors anti-racist sentiment across the country. They monitor lynchings. They monitor this overall racism. But one of the things that they do best is report on the proliferation of hate groups in America. And what I saw very clearly, it stood out at me, it blew my mind. There are 832 hate groups in the United States of America, 832. I don't know what it is for Massachusetts, but I think it would be worth looking at. I'm ashamed to say that the state in which I live, albeit a very large state, California, is the most guilty. There are 72 hate groups in California. It leads the nation. We have a problem. Unless we do something, it's going to get increasingly worse. This is a good start, having this and other conversations like it on colleges locally and throughout the country. I think other institutions are beginning to do that. And so I applaud them.
And so a couple times it's brought up that this day itself was in some ways a product of the list of demands given by you all and others in 1969 to President Laughlin. And so I wonder if you could describe a little bit more what else was on those demands. You mentioned having kind of this group come together with the realization that many of those issues hadn't been dealt with. So I wonder if you could share with us what was on the list of demands originally submitted back, 52 years ago now in 1969.
I'll read them, and we're grateful to student trustee Chris, researcher, future journalist Chris Rim, for putting this together. And I think that you may have helped with it a little bit, helping us to recall what we jotted down in 1969. A little bit cryptic, and I thank Chris for cleaning it up. I prepared the list of demands that were ultimately approved by the Central Committee of Afro-Am at Springfield College. This is what we put down. Some of the thinking may have been a little bit outlandish, but I think for the most part, we were on point. The first one, 200 or more Black students in the incoming freshman class of 1973. Well, that was a far cry for when I entered Springfield College in 1965. My class up to that point had the highest number of Black students. And I keep saying Black students because, as I recall, if there were any Latino or Asian students or Native American students, I didn't know them. So my class was the largest with 12 Black students. Our request was, or our demand, if you will, for 200 or more Black students. Second one, a Black man in the administrative office immediately, in the admissions office, immediately for year-round recruitment of Black students. Okay, so that was a demand. Up to that point, the admissions office recruiters were all white. We asked, number 3, scholarships to be set aside for Black students. Number 4, a day set aside during freshman orientation week, sponsored by Black students. That is what we're talking about today. It didn't happen back then, but it's happening now. So a day set aside during freshman orientation week, sponsored by Black students. Number 5, more Black faculty, coaches included as members of the teaching staff. Number 6, the establishment of a Black cultural center. I mentioned that it came to fruition, became known as the House of Muntu. The establishment of a Black studies program. There was no Black studies program at Springfield at that time. There was no particular focus on Black students or Black people, the contributions that we had made to society. There was no focus on that. As a result of this, I think the very first person to teach Black studies at Springfield College was Professor Alan Austin, who I had the pleasure of meeting during my days as a resident assistant in the Upward Bound program at UMass Amherst. And I was very happy to see that Alan came to Springfield to teach Black studies as a result of our demand. Black representatives on the board of trustees. That was number 8. And then finally, we stated that the Central Committee of Afro-Am must be consulted and must give their approval to these demands, the actions taken on these demands before they were approved. So those are the demands that were submitted in February of 1969, okay? I might add that about 3 or 4 months later, after having come out of the administration building and walking down Alden Street, I did not get a degree, my degree from Springfield College. I didn't get a degree. Thanks be to God. because I had worked in an Upward Bound program at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst for those 3 or 4 years. Not having the degree did not take away from my walking into a job as assistant director of Upward Bound. My sanction for being involved, as was the sanction of all of the legacy alumni, you're gonna have to do, those of you who are graduating in particular, 300 hours of community service before you get a degree from this institution. I said, that's okay. It was perfectly all right with me. Why? Because I had a job. And my job, in my role as a Black student, a graduate of Springfield College, was to say to Springfield College, you need to become involved in 300 hours or more of community service. Don't you know that Springfield is located in the heart of the Black community? All we want you to do is become involved in the lives of African-American people that surround the college. So it was okay with me that I didn't receive the degree, but I'm happy that these demands were submitted.
I'd like to add to that, related to the admissions, the demand relative to 200 students. When we left out of the administration building and went to Alden Street, there was a follow-up, and you find out that things can be done if folks want to do it. That follow-up in relationship to admissions office was this. I was one of the Black students who was in the administration building, and in conversation afterwards with the Dean of Admissions, getting clearance from President Loughlin, we were allowed, we being Black students, we were given a list of students who were Black, and they had applied to Springfield College for the freshman class, the class of 73. So we were allowed to call them, let them know who we were, and that we were looking forward to their coming to Springfield College. That began, one of the things that sticks out for me with this is Clyde Santana, who was in that class, Queens, New York, became a visual arts major under William Blizzard, was a student who I contacted. And it just so happened also, I recognized his name. Clyde had visited Springfield College campus with his sister during his senior year. So again, we were willing to do the work. And it didn't go by us or past us that money was found, because too, a number of the students were in need of ample financial support in order to attend Springfield College. So that was worked out. The result was 50 Black students entered in the class of 73. So you see this tripling. The number that Don mentioned, 12, I remember Terry Burr saying similar number.
Yeah,
There, I believe, was 13 in my class. So you see this consistency in numbers relative to Black students for Springfield College during that time period. But that was something that happened. And I had an opportunity to talk with Dean Lammers. He moved on to New York University. And when I was working for Boys Club of New York, I called New York University to get some information. And he ended up on the phone a few years later.
So you've discuss the context surrounding the list of demands and some of the sort of, you know, discussions, debates, conversations that happened around those. And I wonder if you've also brought up the building takeovers, the administration building in '69, the Massasoit Hall in 1970. And of course, there's so much more in between that's happening too. But I wonder if you could just kind of tell us what you think the legacy of the activism and the student protests that took place on campus over that, you know, roughly year's time. What is that legacy as you look back on it today?
I'd like to start with, this has without a doubt, it's a struggle from day one. And day one, of course, doesn't start with us, because there's a history relative to going way back before Springfield College was even founded. But I like to start with a big part of that legacy, and it can get, it can enlarge, is that Springfield is a better place as a result of what Black students and allies have been struggling to obtain. And as was previously mentioned, gratitude toward administration, faculty, community partners for their support. But again, a big part of it is Springfield is much further along in doing the right thing, the thing that gives purpose to life, from what they've done up to this point.
I think our group, from what I'm understanding, a lot of people heard about the Black takeovers, but they didn't have details about it. So to hear so many students say we heard about it and they were just thirsty for more information. And we had a chance to, well, in my case, I was a nervous wreck doing something like that, because my goal was to go to Springfield College, earn my degree, and teach. That has been my lifelong goal. And I did teach for 2 years. That was my first career in Springfield. But just the whole idea of a few number of Black students getting together and taking over a building, that was pretty brave. I know in my case, I had to really talk to my parents about doing this because they were concerned about losing their money that they were working hard to pay my tuition and so forth. And it was a big sacrifice, as well as keep your grades up, to face possible suspension. And I had to go back and forth with my parents in particular to say, okay, I'll only go so far with this. But we put our actions together in such a way that we weren't out to harm or tear up the building. We were getting tired of not getting answers to concerns that we had. So collectively, we decided we're just going to take over the building, and that's going to force everyone to stop and pay attention and make some action rather than just words in terms of what we were suffering through and what we wanted for the improvement of the campus.
At some point, my life will come to an end. It's going to come to the end for others. And I'm hoping that the commentary that someone will offer is that you may not have agreed with what he said. You may not, but you have to respect him, because rather than a lot of lip service, he took action. And so I'm hoping that that will not only be the commentary on me when the undertaker undertakes to take me under, but it'll be the commentary on the legacy alumni. They not only talked about doing something, they did something. And we want to be remembered for the things that we attempted to do. And if God willing, these things come to fruition. And I believe that they will, because we've been called for such a time as this, 50 years later. More important, what we're doing now than it has ever been in the life of Springfield College. Not only that, the same is true of predominantly white institutions across these United States. They're having dialogue, but we gotta move beyond the dialogue to action. We have to act on what we heard a couple of months ago from or heard about our brother John Lewis. Get into good trouble. Get into good trouble at Springfield College. Get into good trouble is what I tell Boston College all the time. And when I speak to other institutions, I say the same thing. Not important whether you like me or not. What's important is that we do what needs to be done to ensure that these colleges are welcoming and inclusive places for BIPOC, and by extension, all students, faculty, staff, and administrators at Springfield College and colleges across the nation.
And I guess on that note, oh, sorry, Don, but 6 minutes left. And on that note, it sort of segues really to our last question here, which is what tangible things can faculty, staff, administrators, and students do to create a welcoming and inclusive environment at Springfield College, as well as to eliminate racism, white privilege, and prejudice. So if you want to spend the last few minutes here offering us what you see as kind of tangible actions that could take place.
I jotted a few things down, and in the interest of time, I'll just read them very carefully, and hopefully, they'll sink in and will be acted on. Then I'm hoping that Terry and Brother Griff will do the same. These are some things that I believe that I see as being critically important. And I think I speak for the legacy alumni of color group. I think I speak for all of us. One, diversify the senior most levels of the university. And I see some positive signs there, but leadership starts at the top. The transformation of the institution begins with the board of trustees and the president of the institution. That needs to be done. Number two, diversify at the directors level. I'm given to understand that there are two directors of color at Springfield College, two directors. One in the office, and this is in student life, and I needed to clarify that, in student life, the Office of Multicultural Affairs, and then in housing. I think the college can do and must do better than that. Acknowledge alumni of color. Kudos to Springfield College's Triangle magazine for acknowledging distinguished alumni Roscoe Brown and Randolph Bromberry. And we're, as the alumni, legacy alumni of color, recommending others, Doctors Harold Amos and Arnold Bell. We believe that if students can read about them, see their accomplishments, they can be like a Roscoe Brown, like a Harold Amos, like a Randolph Bromberry, and the list goes on. Acknowledge and celebrate that the fact that the first student ever to receive a degree from Springfield College was a Black man, And my guess is that the masses of Springfield College don't know that. But acknowledge the fact that William Beckett, a Black man from St. Louis, Missouri, was the first degree recipient, black, brown, red, yellow, green, otherwise, was the first person to receive a degree. He received that degree, a bachelor's in Humanics, in 1906. Increase the number of courses focusing on diversity. Increase the number of Black faculty and staff. Increase diversity in the athletic department with an emphasis on building a pipeline and diversifying the coaching staff, ensure diversity in the office of spiritual life. And we're very happy to have learned recently that there is a person of color in the counseling center, something that was initially, unless others think otherwise. But the truth is, we, the legacy of alumni, talked about counseling and how critically important it is. For my part, something absolutely needs to be done in the office of spiritual life. And it only makes sense. It harkens back to the history of Springfield College being a place that educated what? Sunday school teaches when it started out. If it was important back then, it's important now. Our spiritual growth and development, so critically important. Education needs to be about a focus not only on the academic, but the social, the cultural, and for my part, the spiritual. Need to have a person of color in the office of spiritual life. Okay, those are things that that come from me in terms of recommendation. Things that students, if I could just go over here, things that faculty, staff, and students can do. Senior level administrators who are largely white, faculty, staff, and administrators, and white students should create opportunities to listen attentively to BIPOC students to get a sense of how they are experiencing Springfield College. Listen, listen, listen. Rather than immediately thinking about responding, listen to how BIPOC students are experiencing the college. Senior-most leadership, other white faculty, staff, and administrators should learn about and do away with microaggressions. Don't ask a sister if I can touch your hair. You don't want to go there. That's going to cause some problems. We don't want to hear, that I wasn't born during slavery. I wasn't born during slavery, so I have nothing to do with it. What you have something to do with is that you are beneficiaries of slavery. I thank God for having worked at a Jesuit institution, Boston College for the years. Georgetown University, a Jesuit institution, just announced $100 million will be set aside for reparations for the fact that Jesuits owned slaves. Other institutions across the United States need to do something about it. Learn about and become allies. And I'm coming to a close, just a couple more. I'll be done in a minute, Ian. Learn about and become allies. That needs to happen. Faculty, staff, students, and administrators at Springfield College. Become allies, become co-conspirators like John Brown. Students of color, affiliate organizations, and a like number of white student organizations should partner with each other for a semester or for a year to explore matters of diversity and to look for those things that we have in common. And I promise you, at the end of the day, the conclusion will be that we have more in common than that which divides us. Understand that people of color, and this is the final thing that I'll say on this, understand that people of color at predominantly white institutions can play a consultative role, but don't place the entire burden of responsibility on us as people of color to transform the institution. No, no, no. If change is going to happen at Springfield College and at other predominantly white institutions across the country, it's going to be because white folk are going to have to take the lead. When that happens, beginning at the senior most levels of the institution, that institution or those institutions will be transformed. Let me stop there.
Well, Don, Terry, Richard, I want to thank you so much. I mean, we could keep going for a long time, but we've got another panel coming up at 2:40, and we want to give folks time to stretch their legs, get some food in them, and rejoin us then. But first, please thank our panelists, Dr. Brown, Ms. Burr, and Mr. Griffin for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
A real pleasure. Blessings to you, blessings to Springfield College. And thank you, Dr. Hill, Lisa Holmes, John Woodruff, Ray Cromer, and everyone responsible for this historic inaugural day that I hope will become a part of the institution, a part of the fabric of Springfield College. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you all. Everyone have a great day.
Yeah.